Coming up, an outspoken former NFL great is weighing in on the possible quarterback controversy at Alabama. And who's going to win between Tua and Hurts? We'll talk about it next, right here on SEC Country Live. Hello everyone, welcome to SEC Country Live. My name is Brandon Adams. This is the former Alabama All-American Mike Johnson. We're glad you're with us here on the program today. A lot of fun coming up with us. We kind of get into everything going on in the SEC here today. Should be a lot of fun.
A week out from signing day, is that right? A week out, something like that?
Yeah, we're getting close.
Yeah, we are getting ultimately close. Obviously, a ton of recruiting topics today as well.
Yeah, so we'll kind of get into all that. I also looked down on my screen and realized somehow I've been logged out of Facebook. So I'm going to look forward to reading your comments here in just a moment. But in the course of actually broadcasting the show, I'm going to have to try to think of what my Facebook password is, get re-signed into Facebook, and hopefully take a few comments. So listen, that's the kind of way it goes here sometimes in SEC Country Live. So we'll kind of dive in and kind of get some of that going. Speaking of comments, interesting comments start our program off today. Item number 1 here on our SEC Country Live First and 10. Joe Theismann, who many of you may not be aware was a former NFL great, quarterback for the Washington Redskins, famously involved in a very serious injury, Lawrence Taylor. You may have seen this at the beginning of the movie The Blind Side. Right. That may be the way a lot of our younger viewers are acquainted with Joe Theismann, but he is a outspoken guy, was an analyst for a long time. He was on the Alabama podcast with Ryan Fowler at SEC Country, and kind of weighed in on the quarterback situation, the possible controversy, and let's face it, this thing could bubble up to be a controversy eventually between Tua and Hurts. He kind of weighed in on what he thinks about both guys right now, and frankly, Theismann was pretty complimentary of both guys. Let me start with Theismann here on the Alabama quarterback for the moment who won the national championship, Tua Tagovailoa, coming off the bench, leading the Tide to the victory. What did Theismann think about that young man? Well, here he is weighing in with Ryan Fowler right now.
That's one of the most incredible things I've seen, to be able to come out and throw the way he did. And, you know, sometimes if you're young, you just don't know what to be afraid of. And I think he just went in the game and started throwing the ball around and felt like, hey, this is sort of fun. I was a senior in high school a year ago. This is pretty cool. And you could see him having a great time throwing the ball. I was really impressed with the way he threw it and really impressed with his composure.
Do you think that that's true, what he says there, that it is to a degree easier for Tua, given the fact that, you know, you've not been in before, right, you don't know what to be nervous about? He means that euphemistically. I don't think he means that, you know, necessarily, you know, just like by the letter there. But is it a little easier to be sort of like thrust into a game you're not expecting, and is it maybe a little easier to combat defenses who haven't prepared specifically to face you?
There is a part of me that looks at it and says, you know what, if Tua had felt the entire week's buildup, if he had played, say he had played a little bit in the Clemson game, because the report did come out before the game that he might play against Clemson. Say he had played a little bit and had played a lot better than Jalen, and maybe, you know, he's announced as a starter a week before the national title game. There is a sense of me that thinks that he is extremely nervous. He's you know, he's hearing from all his family, hey, make sure you do this, hearing from you know, all of Bama, you know, fans, and he's, hey, make sure this happens, make sure this happens. There's a part of me that says, man, it's a good thing he just came in the second half, because he doesn't have to overthink it. He can just go out there and play backyard ball. He can roll out of the pocket. He can break a tackle. He can go the other way, bounce back against the grain, and throw a strike on the run the way he did that second half. And it's second nature to a guy like Tua. It's become his second nature. But it is a good thing, in my opinion. He didn't have time to actually overthink what his role was going to be in the game.
It is worth pointing out, though, I had a chance to ask Kirby Smart after the game, did you expect Tua Tagovailoa to play the national championship? He says he absolutely did. Now, coaches also have a way of kind of saying this stuff, whether they mean that or not, whether it's true or not. But I do sort of take Kirby at his word here that he's the kind of, much like his mentor, Nick Saban, the kind of person that sort of prepares for all contingency. So I don't know that George was as caught off guard by Tua as some might think, but is Tua sort of easing into the game from a nerve standpoint made a little easier when he doesn't necessarily know it's going to happen? That may be true.
No, I think Kirby Smart was well aware of the fact that you could see Tua at some point. And Kirby's watching film. He knows what Jalen Hurts is doing. He knows what Tua's probably capable of. He's seen some film on Tua dating back. And like I said, the report that comes on AL.com before the Sugar Bowl where, hey, you might see Tua play today. So Kirby whether or not he really expected it, he was going to be prepared for it. He was going to prepare that defense for a lot of those instances he thought he might could see.
But right now, the most interesting quarterback on the Alabama roster is probably not Tua Tagovailoa. He may very well be the best. I believe that he probably is. But the more interesting story here involves Jalen Hurts. And it's really with Hurts that the possibility for controversy this year with Alabama lies. Does he play well enough to kind of get back in the mix here for the quarterback position? Does he maybe become disgruntled? All of a sudden, there's a issue that Saban has to deal with. Well, Joe Theismann weighed in on what he thinks the future may still hold for the other quarterback, Jalen Hurts. Here's Theismann again.
I think he can improve. It depends on how hard he wants to work and the way he applies himself. I think those are important things that you have to look at and consider. But from my perspective, I think he can improve. I think he certainly has. At times, he throws the ball very well. Other times, he gets a little out of whack. By the way, if you're concerned, I am now logged into Facebook, so I'll be able to read your comments here in just a moment. But Theismann says that Hurts can improve. Depends on how hard he works. And I guess what this leads me to is, Mike, the question of, okay, now the job is, I'm going to assume here for a moment, but the job has been taken away from him. What kind of motivation does that bring about in Jalen Hurts? Is he more motivated now to take on the extra responsibility of being a passing quarterback? Does he finally get serious about that part of his game? Is he capable of getting serious about that part of his game? What does the potential demotion do to Hurts' motivation factor?
Well, I think Hurts can improve as a passer. I think he can improve his accuracy. I don't know if he's ever going to be as naturally gifted as what Tua is as a passer. I think that's a hard hill to climb here in one offseason, and you're going to see these guys go to battle, obviously, in spring practice. But when you look at what Jalen is and what Tua is, Jalen has to decide what his goals are. What are my goals going to be for myself? Do I want to make it to the NFL as a quarterback? Do I want to make it to the NFL period? Do I want to make it back to a national title game as a starting quarterback and win one? Do I want to get to an SEC title game and win one as a starting quarterback? What are Jalen Hurts' goals? I think that's what he has to decide for himself. If all he wants to get to the NFL, change positions, make something happen. Think outside the box. But if he wants to be a starting quarterback on a team that's national championship bound, he might have to go somewhere else.
Landshark Rebels makes an interesting comment in the comment section. Landshark says, nothing wrong with playing two quarterbacks. Just ask Mississippi State. Wish they did that last year. Is there a thing here where you could potentially see, the new offensive coordinator Mike Locksley and the role that Dan Enos is going to play there as quarterbacks coach? I mean, is there a chance they create a system in which both quarterbacks are involved in most games? I mean, can that work for Alabama?
I definitely think it's possible, and here's what the difference is and what the complexities are compared to last year. Last year we had this conversation. How do you get both these guys on the field? Tua's too good to keep off the field. And the conversation was, where do you bring Tua in? If he's not the starting quarterback, you don't bring him in on 3rd and long. You don't bring him in the 2-minute drill. He's a true freshman. You can't just pop him in. All of a sudden, those roles become reversed. All of a sudden, you can look at like the Chris Leak, Tim Tebow kind of dynamic where, hey, if we do get to 3rd down, we want to have both options of a running quarterback and a guy that's durable or a goal line quarterback. That becomes an option. I think that's much more of an option this year than it ever was going to be last year. I wouldn't be surprised to see Georgia do something along similar lines.
Yeah, that could be the case when it comes to Fields and Fromm there, Georgia. But on Jalen Hurts, let me also kind of touch the third rail here on this issue, the kind of place that no one really wants to go. I mean, y'all know how I feel about Georgia, and you know how impressed I was personally with Roquan Smith, the Butkus Award winner. But in the national championship game in the first half, even in the first half when Jalen Hurts was struggling, I saw him make Roquan miss a couple times. And Roquan Smith, folks, he just didn't miss tackles in 2017, but Jalen Hurts had the kind of athleticism that could make him miss. Is that the kind of athleticism that potentially puts Hurts at a different position? I don't even know what it would be, H-back, wide receiver, I don't know what. But my gosh, he's hard to tackle. I mean, is he too athletic not to be on the field, even if Tua is the quarterback of the future?
Yeah, it's weird because he has such an interesting skill set. I don't know if he's low enough to the ground and durable enough to really be a running back. I don't know that the short-term explosion is there, but I think the open field, durability and the ability to make people miss is definitely there. I'm not sure what position it is either. You can talk about running back, you can talk about a slot guy. I don't know that the open end speed is there. I see him as a quarterback, and so obviously if he makes that decision, he wants to play quarterback. I'm not sure what you do. I'm not sure where you stick him in unless he is that goal line option.
Couple quick comments we'll get to, then we'll change the subject. Jenna Burns says, Hurts couldn't do anything except run in year 1. Year 2, he's got all kinds of stuff we haven't seen him do before. Year 3, he's got great work ethic and attitude. Can't wait to see him this year. Those two final points from Jenna there, I hope they are true for Hurts' behalf, but for Hurts' sake. Yeah. he is going to have a great attitude, and he's going to have a great work ethic. If he doesn't have both those things in large measure, he'll never be heard from again.
Yeah, that's the thing is, talking at the top, listen, you can improve greatly if you're Jalen Hurts, but this is not, going from your freshman year to your sophomore year again. This is Jalen Hurts that'll be going into his junior year, and just from the outside looking in, obviously I'm not watching a ton of tape on Jalen Hurts, but Tua is just much obviously the better, more gifted natural passer. And so I don't know that Jalen can climb that mountain that fast to where the ball just looks quite as good as it coming out of Tua's hand right now.
Cliff Nelson in the comment section. Roquan Smith's name cannot be mentioned in the show without Cliff and LSU fans say Devin White was better.
Devin White's a good one.
So there you go. We'll continue to have that conversation for many times to come. All right, let me change the subject here. Let me move on to item number 2 here on our SEC Country Live First and 10 list. And I love lists. I like rankings of things just because they create, debates, and debates are what we do here in SEC Country Live. We love that kind of stuff, especially the good-natured way we do it here on this program. And Paul Meyerberg had a list of the coaches in year one who he expects to win the most in 2018. It's kind of an interesting list. A lot of SEC names, as you might imagine, sort of factor into this list. And one of the things that's kind of interesting about this list is on the very top, he's got Joe Morehead, the brand new Mississippi State coach, who comes over as Penn State offensive coordinator, becomes Mississippi State head coach. Morehead at Mississippi State ranked well ahead of Dan Mullen, the Florida coach, who's like 5th or 6th on the list, something like that. And I'll show you kind of hear what Meyerberg said. First about Morehead from Mississippi State. He writes, Morehead inherits a great situation from his predecessor, Dan Mullen, even if quarterback Nick Fitzgerald doesn't make the full recovery from the ankle injury. He goes on to say Mississippi State brings a lot of depth, talent on both sides of the ball, enough athleticism on offense to fit the nuts and bolts of Morehead's explosive scheme. The schedule gives the Bulldogs a potential toss-up game at home against Florida, Auburn, Texas A&M. It's fair to expect 8 or 9 wins during the regular season to go with top 25 contention. So he says that Morehead, the brand new coach at Mississippi State, could be the biggest year one winner of all the new coaches in college football, not to mention the guys from the SEC. Below that, like I said, like 5th, 6th on the list is Dan Mullen at Florida. What Meyerberg writes about Mullen is interesting relationship to consider. Florida's impatient, deservedly so. Expectations are immense. But given Mullen's track record at Mississippi State, where he slowly, steadily built a winner without any shortcuts, is it fair to expect some sort of immediate bump into the top 2 of the SECs? Might not be fair, but it's also not crazy to think about a Florida team that's far better than its 4-win finish in 2017, quickly rising up the standings to give Georgia a scare in the East. So for me, this topic is about Florida. The issues here about Florida. Mullen was the coach who chose to leave Mississippi State. If he leaves Mississippi State and Mississippi State then wins more games without him the following year, is that a bad look for Mullen personally?
No, I don't think it is because, listen, when you hear Paul Meyerberg talk about what Mississippi State is next year, and we touched on this a little bit, I think yesterday or the day before, they're not missing much of anything when it comes to this football team. I mean, they're losing Martinez Rankin. He's by far the best player they're going to lose. He was their best offensive lineman, but he wasn't even in for half the games last year. I think he missed 5 starts last year on the offensive line. You lose Donald Gray. You lose, I think somebody in the secondary I have to look closer at. But Mississippi State, as far as their top 2, their depth, they are loaded across the board. Joe Morehead, in my opinion, if he can't get it done this year, he's not going to get it done. I don't know at what point you look at getting the top 25 recruiting class possibly this year if you're Joe Morehead. That would be a great thing there in year one. But the talent is surrounding him to be able to win out at Mississippi State. If he thinks he's going to have better talent next year at Mississippi State, it's just not going to happen. I think he's in a great position to succeed.
Rick Keene makes an interesting comment in the comment section. Rick says, Gators are going to be 6-0 heading into the week before Georgia. Mississippi State against the SEC West, they're not going to win 7 games all season long. So if we take Rick at his word, it's a 6-0 start. That's a win against Charleston Southern, which we'll all agree with. Win against Kentucky, you and I will agree with on that.
Yep.
Colorado State, that's a win. He's also saying win at Tennessee, then at Mississippi State. That gets you to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then a win against LSU. And then it'd be Vanderbilt also before you get to Georgia.
I think.
So that gets you to 7-0 before Georgia. I don't think Florida goes undefeated in that stretch of back-to-back road games at Tennessee, at Mississippi State, LSU, and then even at Vanderbilt, which is probably a semi-tough team. It's given Florida some trouble in recent years. Florida's not sweeping those 4 games right there. They're just not.
Yeah,
at least from my perspective.
Yeah, it's going to be tough. And you talk about consistency, and I think that's what Gators fans want to see. And I mentioned this yesterday. To me, it's not about what the wins and losses are going to be in year one or Dan Mullen. It's the same thing at Tennessee. They want to see a consistent brand of football. You don't want to see a team that wins by 30 one week and loses by 30 the next week, and like you did Florida last year. It's just, to me, it's about going into Tennessee and in Knoxville, taking care of business, making a good showing, win or lose. I think that's a tough game either way. That Mississippi State game, the week after that, we talked about it yesterday, that is going to be an incredibly tough environment in Starkville for Dan Mullen to try to take a team in and win. I think they're going to have their backs against the wall. And then LSU, you already know, we talked about it all offseason last year, what that rivalry's turned into. So that stretch, in my opinion, you're right. I don't know how they come through that unscathed.
So while I don't agree with Rick Keene, the commenter, on going undefeated through that stretch, I do agree with him, though, that I think it's a reasonable objective, even if they don't state it this way. Florida ought to win more games than Mississippi State. I mean, they just should. Mississippi State's in the tougher division.
Yeah.
Yes, they got the quarterback returning, and they got some, talent on defense. And with all due respect to Mississippi State, Florida ought to win more games. I'm not sure that it will, but it ought to.
Yeah, I think that's reasonable to say. And listen, you look at Mississippi State in that matchup, they'll probably be undefeated going into that game with Florida, too. I mean, they opened up Stephen F. Austin, and you got Kansas State, which could be a tough game, Louisiana Lafayette, and then at Kentucky, and that's right before you go to play Florida. So it's going to be a decent matchup. And I think Mississippi State is, we mentioned it, Florida's schedule is kind of easy to start off with. Mississippi State's is, too. It's not till the back half where you go at LSU, you get Texas A&M, at Alabama, and then that's going to be a tough stretch, too.
Florida at Mississippi State is one of the great swing games
in
the SEC for 2018.
Yep.
You'll talk about two seasons that could potentially go in very different directions. The winner of that game could really put themselves in a pretty good position. The loser could be kind of in the opposite.
Well, I think that way, too, about Florida-Tennessee earlier in the year. I really think that a lot of the fan base, how they're going to feel about next season, hinges on that game. Like, who can get the first strike between these two first-year head coaches?
I still continue to say that while I love what Tennessee's doing in recruiting, Florida, for me, is better on the field in 2018 than Tennessee is, but that doesn't guarantee a head-to-head win either. Jay Don in the comment section says, I believe it's going to take Emory Jones time to make Florida better. He might be our future, but right now we're struggling at quarterback and won't have much success in our situation. That's the other thing to think about in those, to go back to the one commenter who said, hey, it's a 6-7-0 start for Florida. That's breaking in a brand new quarterback. And the assumption is, and I just think this is a reasonable assumption, that if Jones is the guy for Florida, he's better in November than he is in September.
Yeah.
Does it make it tougher to beat Tennessee? Does it make it tougher to beat Mississippi State? Are those games made harder because of the fact that you're playing potentially a freshman quarterback for at least a portion of those games?
I think it is, but I mentioned it. I think, in my opinion, obviously, we had a little bit of a different opinion on this. I think you've got to start Emory Jones to start the year. If he's going to be your quarterback at some point in the year, and he's going to be a true freshman, and you're going to consider him at least your backup to start the year. If you're going into fall camp and he's your number 2, I don't know why you're waiting to put him in. I really don't. I think, Felipe Franks, for everything he's done good for you, I just think that Emory Jones' ceiling is so much higher under Dan Mullen's offense. You go ahead and plug him in against Charleston Southern and Kentucky and Colorado State and then see what you can come out with in Tennessee.
So my only thought on Emory Jones here is, you may be factually accurate, but coaches, for better or for worse, believe that quarterbacks perform better, and really guys at all positions, but quarterbacks the spot where you kind of highlight this. They perform better when everything has to be earned. If Felipe Franks is performing so poorly in practice, you've got no choice but to start Emory Jones. I think Dan Mullen privately is going to believe that he's not getting the most he could get out of Emory Jones. If Jones has to really step up his level of play during practice, perform well during games to beat out Felipe Franks, at that point in time, I think most coaches would say you've got a better version of Emory Jones.
And I definitely agree with you. My only point is that it might look like that. It might look ugly to start with. You might have Emory Jones in the first few games of the season that he just can't do anything right. But I think the worst thing, the thing that would look more terrible to Florida fans is if you have a replay of last year's quarterback situation where you're playing Felipe Franks and then in game 1 you put in Malik Zaire and then all of a sudden Luke Del Rio starting in week 5 and then all of a sudden you're switching back and forth between quarterbacks. If Emory Jones, that brings me to that point. If Emory Jones is the guy of the future, then let him go ahead and be the future. Let him work out the kinks on the field against competition, and then you still have 3 years left with him.
Another comment here quickly. Iman Lee says, Dan Mullen brings a confident swagger. McElwain just accepted losing to big-name games and not seem to want to fight and care about actually playing hard-nosed football. Do you agree with that? Is Mullen going to be more confident? Is he going to have more of a swagger than McElwain? I thought sometimes McElwain sort of wore the false bravado clothes a little bit. I thought he allowed some of his players to do that. Is Mullen going to be more authentically confident?
I think Dan Mullen's persona fits this program better than Jim McElwain, and for better or for worse. If you want to call that swagger, if you want to call it confidence, say what you want, but I think Dan Mullen's persona actually fits what Florida loves in a head coach more so than Jim McElwain. And I mentioned that before last year started. Jim McElwain, West Coast kind of guy, was at Fresno, went to Eastern Washington, didn't really have the same mentality that Florida did. And I thought it was an awkward kind of matchup, and I thought he'd still be successful at it. For some reason, when I see Dan Mullen and I see him in that orange, and you see him get off the plane doing the Gator chomp, it just feels like he's supposed to be the head coach of the Florida Gators.
Cliff Nelson says, going back to the quarterbacks one more time, Mullen's offense needs a running quarterback. He says Felipe Franks is going to be on the bench. That is certainly true that Franks doesn't fit what Mullen wants to do, but I still think coaches, ultimately they're better off with the freshman quarterback playing, but I believe that Mullen's going to think they're better off seeing the freshman quarterback earn the job over the course of the season. But we'll see how it plays out.
I think that's a tough statement too, because you say he needs a running quarterback. I don't think Dan Mullen's offense needs a running quarterback. When you look at some of the, obviously you go back to like Utah days, you're going back, doing some things. But Dan Mullen did have throwing quarterbacks at different points in his career. He can mold the offense around whoever he thinks is the best. I'm just not sure that in the end, Emory Jones won't be the best.
All right, item number 3 here on our SEC Country Live, 1st and 10. So Georgia has been the number 1 recruiting class in the country. Some thought, based on the re-ranks, maybe Ohio State's close to passing. The Dogs may, I guess for now, maybe even ranked higher in the 24/7 Sports Composite. Alabama's obviously trying to finish strong, but Georgia's got some big targets out there for how it can also have a pretty big close as well, and maybe a bit of a surprise. There's been some thought among Georgia fans there could be a choice here coming either by the 2 linebackers or by Georgia when it comes to the 4-star linebacker Otis Reese, a Michigan commit, or the 4-star linebacker Quay Walker, an Alabama commit. But Jeff Sintel, who knows Georgia recruiting well, told Dog Nation Daily, Mike Show this week, that it would not be outside the realm of possibility if Georgia actually closed with both these elite linebackers. Here's Jeff Sintel on that subject.
When I think about the models and everything else that finishes out the class for Georgia, well, I think the most Georgia thing to do for the Bulldogs to finish out this recruiting class was to somehow find a way to have both Walker and Reese in its closing flurry of 4, I still think 4, at the most 5 names here. Having those 2 would, definitely entrench Georgia as the premier defensive squad for years to come, especially the versatility of those 2 guys. I think it's not outlandish to think that Georgia could perhaps end up with both of those guys, and that might seem like 2 of the least likely 2-pack to put together in the Final 4 here for Georgia. And I do still now kind of think that Georgia will at least end up with one of those 2 gentlemen as well.
So good news for Georgia fans that Jeff Sintel says it's probably either one of Otis Reese or Quay Walker, but the possibility of getting both seems huge here, both in terms of what it would mean tangibly for Georgia on the field. It'd be significant, but also the symbolic thing here of flipping a commitment from Michigan on National Signing Day, even though most people expect it's more likely than not that Walker goes somewhere other than Alabama. He is still a public commit to the Crimson Tide, flipping him from Alabama. It'd be a huge symbolic win for Georgia here as well, right?
Well, it'd be a huge symbolic win in a couple of different ways. First of all, I'm among the contingency that doesn't think that Quay Walker, there's any way he ends up at Alabama, because the comments he's made is early playing time is a big deal to him, and while Alabama has a ton of issues in the secondary, linebacker next year should not be a big concern for them. I don't know how much playing time Quay Walker would get next year at Alabama. So I think when you look at some of the other situations, Tennessee, when you look at Georgia, there's probably a better opportunity. I will tell you this, though, looking at these 2 guys, and I don't know much about Otis Reese, but the fact that he is a Michigan commit, and I know it sounds weird, me, a Bama guy saying, man, I kind of hope this guy goes to Georgia, but I hope this guy goes to Georgia. I just tell you, when you look at Michigan, I think they're like 15th or 14th in recruiting rankings right now as a team. It would make my day if Michigan loses this guy to Georgia to an SEC school.
One of our producers, Patrick, was telling me something yesterday that I was not aware of. Do you know that right now Otis Reese is Michigan's only top 100 commit? I mean, for a guy like Jim Harbaugh, who
that makes it even better,
who had made so many, rattled so many pots and pans, made such a big deal about so much since coming into Michigan and college football. I mean, not only is the on-field product not really been what it's supposed to have been, but Reese, who is I think is more likely than not to flip to Georgia. I mean, that'd be Michigan's only top 100 commit. That's a huge, huge loss potential for Michigan.
I'm not trying to go on a big tangent about Michigan, but I am looking at their signing class now, and he's only there's only 2 other guys that are actually in the top 150. I mean, they've got some guys that are back in the 500s and the 600s and the 700s in that signing class too. So that is an interesting dynamic. And when you look at Reese and Quay Walker too side by side, and I think Jeff Sintel did a good job of highlighting this, you have to think, also matched up with Tyson Campbell here at the deadline, that kind of does supplant Georgia as really having a chance to have a dominant, like not just a 1-year dominant defense or 2-year dominant. I mean, that could put Georgia for the next 4 years really in a good spot.
Yeah, because you're in a situation where you can do what Alabama did with Rashaan Evans. You can take an elite outside linebacker and play him on the inside. Georgia's probably going to do that with Channing Tindall. Quay Walker used him as a kind of a traditional linebacker. There's some thought that Otis Reese might become like a nickel back. I mean, that's how what Georgia might be doing here, and that's kind of rarefied recruiting area that it would be in. But here's the thing, and I know you know this. If you want to beat Alabama, that's the only choice you have. I mean, if you want to go to the Outback Bowl, get you a couple outside linebackers, you'll be fine. But if you want to win the SEC, beat Alabama, win the national championship, then you've got to be just as stacked as they are, and this is Georgia's attempt to do that.
Yeah, no, I agree, and it's a great attempt to do it. I mean, and it's kind of a perfect storm too, because Alabama, with we can talk about a ton of different directions, but I don't know that Alabama closes as well as a lot of people had hoped they would. In Alabama land over in Alabama, and it's like, did they get Isaac Taylor Stewart? They made the late push on Patrick Surtain. I don't know if that one really happens. Obviously, they're pushing for some different guys, Elijah Griffin being one. I don't know how many they get, and I think they have to have those secondary players. So it might be a perfect storm on both sides if you want to put Alabama in the bullseye, where, hey, Georgia's really building something on defense, and Alabama this year, although they had a great class last year, might not be back to par this year.
Speaking of Alabama recruiting, we'll actually talk a little bit more about some of the ways they're trying to close this 2018 class coming up in a moment. Georgia fans obviously hoping for big news with their own 2018 class. From now on, let's talk about the Auburn Tigers here, item number 4 in our SEC Country Live First and 10. And I thought that Justin Ferguson over at SECCountry.com had kind of an interesting look at Auburn in the NFL draft, particularly what's happened recently at the Senior Bowl. Gus Malzahn shows up there. He was proud of the showing that his players had, not only in terms of how they were performing in practice, but just how many of them there were. Here's a little taste of what Justin wrote about this at SEC Country. He said during a post-practice interview scrum, reporter noted to Malzahn that Auburn had more players in Mobile than that time than any other program in terms of this year's Senior Bowl. He says that put a smile on the normally reserved coach's face. Let me tell you, it makes me feel proud as a program to see where these guys are at, Malzahn said. So Malzahn taking some pride in having a lot of guys this year's Senior Bowl. He can also take some pride in the recent draft performance of Auburn. They put a lot of guys in the NFL. As a guy that played in the SEC and in college, how much does Auburn's NFL draft success matter to the future of the program?
I think it matters a lot. I think that when you look at it as a head coach in the SEC, you have to have the ability to go back to these recruits and say, hey, listen, I can help you get where you want to go. And in order to do that, you have to have guys that under your watch have wound up in the NFL. And listen, it's not just the Senior Bowl guys. And by the way, that's kind of a loaded number because the long snapper and the kicker are two of the guys at the Senior Bowl. But when you look at Kerryon Johnson, when you look at Cam Petway, when you look at Jeff Holland, when you look at Carlton Davis, the juniors that left early, when you look at, I think they had, 4 guys drafted last year in the draft. When you look at, that Braden Smith is an All-American type guy, they definitely have the ability to get these guys there. And it's not going to be lies by Gus Malzahn to walk into living rooms and say, listen, I can make you into the player you want to be. I can get you to the next level. I can get you to perform at a high level. And that is an extremely important aspect of recruiting.
Justin also gives you some numbers here of how Auburn's done in the draft. And you look at Gene Chizik, the coach before Gus Malzahn. In 2012 and 2013, as few as 1 player drafted. In 2011, as high as 4. Tommy Tuberville kind of all over the place as well. He had 5 guys taken each in 2007, 2008. Had no players drafted in 2003. Terry Bowden before that, kind of all over the place. But Malzahn, very consistent. 4 guys drafted in 2017. 3 guys drafted in 2016. 5 guys drafted in 2015 and 4 guys drafted in 2014. I use the word there, consistent. That's an important word to mention because Auburn has also been consistent with its recruiting product as well. So what you have here is consistently good recruiting, consistently good sort of pipeline to the NFL, but on the field. It's national championship game appearance in 2013. It's awful records in 2014 and 2015. Back in the Sugar Bowl in 2016, in a New Year's type bowl with the Peach Bowl in 2017.
Yeah.
I mean, I think the underlying sort of debate here is, or the underlying point that Malzahn hopes he's able to make is, see, we really are a consistent program.
Right.
We're not some wild program that you can't predict from one year to the next. We're a program that you can count on. And for me, that's still what 2018 is about for Auburn. Can Malzahn prove that he's a consistent coach that runs a consistent program? And I mean consistently good. To me, that's what this subject's really about.
Yeah.
Does the draft performance indicate a program that really is stable and consistent?
Well, I think that's such a tough dynamic to come from because, you look at a guy like, say, Kevin Sumlin. I mean, top 10 draft picks, top first-round draft picks the entire time he's at Texas A&M, but never did get over that hump. Now, they never had a losing season, but never did get over the hump. You had, kind of got stuck around the 8 wins. And listen, when we start to make that comparison, I look at Malzahn, I look at some of the Auburn players that we're taking early. You got to love Nick Fairley. Nick Fairley's made a good career out of himself. Greg Robinson's kind of bounced around to a couple of places, but an extremely good offensive lineman. These are top 5 draft picks. I mean, these are guys that, these are incredible college football players. Add in Cam Newton, obviously, was the #1 overall pick. they've put some great players in the NFL, and so Gus Malzahn's been around from that, and I think that's just one aspect of really being able to say this is a top-tier program.
Yeah, I do understand that, but sometimes it's about the underlying fundamentals here. Underlying fundamentals of, hey, a lot of NFL players in this program, a lot of high recruiting class in this program, and you mentioned the comparison to Kevin Sumlin, Texas A&M. I'd argue that for the most part, Sumlin was consistent. He was just sort of consistently average.
Yeah.
Whereas in Auburn's case, there are a lot of very different kind of seasons under Malzahn. There's the very good of 2013. There's the I think pretty bad of 2014, 2015, and then whatever combination 2016 with the Sugar Bowl and the sort of meager record and this year was. I mean, Auburn to me is the opposite of consistent. Some very high, some very low. Sumlin at A&M probably was consistent. Auburn's sort of talent measurements are a lot more consistent than the on-field production has been.
I definitely think they're, and we talked about Gus Malzahn a ton this year, and I had questions about what he was as a head coach, but I don't think there's any doubt in my mind, even as a Bama guy, that this program is trending in the right direction. I think that's all you really got when you talk about Gus Malzahn at the Senior Bowl, and you look how many players left early, you look how many players in the Senior Bowl, you look with some of the games they're able to win this year against a couple of #1 teams, and also coming very close to beating Clemson. And it just feels like this program is definitely trending in the right direction. He's got a new contract under him. They've got a returning quarterback they feel like they can do some damage with. They kept basically their entire coaching staff intact. So while consistency has evaded Gus Malzahn for some time, I don't think there's any doubt in my mind that 2018 will provide the perfect landscape to keep it going.
Couple quick comments here. Christavier Stoney Williams says that Gus has been overpaid at Auburn. Mike Shaner says talk is cheap when it comes to Auburn here. And I certainly understand where the talk is cheap idea comes from, but I think there's a degree to which Auburn's got to create a narrative here. What is your story going into 2018? Georgia's the SEC champions. That's a story that tells itself. Alabama's the reigning national champions. That's a story that tells itself. I think what you see from Gus Malzahn here is an attempt to create a narrative about its program.
Yeah. No, I agree with you, and I think that. And listen, here's a narrative that's scary if you're an Auburn fan, if you're Gus Malzahn. Here's a narrative you're going to hear for the next couple of years, and it's something he hasn't had to deal with until he just got this new money. Is he overpaid now? And it's like, it used to be when you talk about Gus Malzahn, and really for the value there, you're really getting a good coach, you're getting 8, 9 wins, you're getting a guy who could compete with Nick Saban, has been able to beat Georgia a couple times. Now the narrative is, man, does he really deserve all that money? For a guy who lost in the Peach Bowl to UCF, for a guy who couldn't close out the SEC championship game in a rematch. Does he deserve $7.5 million a year? I think that's going to be a narrative moving forward.
Josh Rainey says Auburn's going to go 8-4. If Auburn goes 8-4, Auburn fans will be very disappointed.
Yeah, I agree.
They're going to be very disappointed. All right, item number 5 here in our SEC Country Live First and 10 list. So this is kind of a weird thing. This is an old Saban clip. It got shared by some coach from like North Dakota or something. And you know how stuff sometimes on the internet sort of gets a life of its own. So this thing got shared a bunch today of Nick Saban sort of defining, at least according to this one coach who tweeted this out, this was his definition of what the Alabama process, what Nick Saban talks a lot about is. Here is some old school Saban. Is this the definition of the process? Well, let's listen. Let's try to figure it out.
You got to work and earn it, and then we got to earn it in the next game, and we're going to have to earn it in the next game. And what we did tonight was great. We won one game. We got 11 more. We need to take them one game at a time, and we need to improve as a team. And that's what our team needs to be focused on. And if we want to be a good team, that's what we need to do. That's how everybody should think. We made a B on the midterm, so we're going to take a week off and get a D and have a C average, or we're going to go try to get an A. This is one game. What we did in this game, just one game. That's what it counts. I like for our players to have confidence, but I think our players played with confidence tonight. I didn't see anybody scared out there. I didn't see any fear. Now you all scared to ask another question?
Definition of the process or not, but it is good stuff there from Alabama coach Nick Saban. I mean, how much did this kind of stuff you heard pre-game, post-game from him behind those closed-door locker rooms when you were playing in Alabama, how much did that mirror what you also hear right there?
Well, I heard that exact talk in my nightmares when I was in school. I'm pretty sure that clip actually comes from after we played Clemson in 08 to open the season.
I think that may be right, because the video that the coach shared was a very young looking Saban, much younger.
I think it's about 10 years ago.
Yeah, maybe a little bit less of the, well, just go ahead.
But it's crazy to me. Yeah, it's crazy to me because this is not, for Nick Saban, that's not coach speak. I mean, it is coach speak, But that's how that guy lives life. I mean, that's that was the message he was delivering every day, and it never let up. I mean, we've talked about him talking after national title games about not being able to recruit all week.
Yeah.
I cannot tell you how many times that message was hammered into my head, and it's difficult for me. And just an opening into the way I think about certain things like this, it's difficult for me because I look at other programs and I wonder how they're going to get this message across, and I have to realize sometimes in the back of my own head that there's more than one way to go about it.
Okay, so you tell me if I'm wrong about this because you obviously lived it, but I believe I have some understanding on this. What Saban says right there, that's not the process.
Right.
I'm amazed at how few people really understand what the process is. The process is not results-based. And you tell me if I'm wrong about this. The process has got nothing to do with winning or losing games.
Yes.
The process is about showing up and doing your work every day and letting the results take care of themselves. And the guy that tweets this out saying this is the process, he's a coach, and even he doesn't understand it. The process is not about getting A's on midterms or winning games. Saban does discuss those in those clips, but Saban doesn't say that's what the process is. The process is about doing your job every day.
Yeah, the process is about holding yourself to a standard.
Yeah.
That's exactly what it is. And I hope that kind of envelops it a little bit. The process is holding yourself to a standard. Now, it's like LeBron. Say if LeBron walked into a high school gym and played in a high school game, obviously he'd dominate and he would win. And he would kind of skate by and he could do whatever he wanted to. But is he playing to a LeBron standard? Is he playing to an NBA standard? I think that's the best way to kind of talk about it. And the standard has to happen every day. Doesn't matter who you're practicing against. Doesn't matter who you're playing. It has to happen every day.
Steve Weaver says the process is doing your best at all times. Steve, I agree with that. Trip Davidson says Kirby stamped the process in Athens, Georgia. We've certainly seen some evidence of that when it comes to Georgia. And if you want to know why, Kirby may succeed in a way that a lot of the coaches don't copy Nick Saban, I truly believe this. There are a lot of coaches who allow themselves to stop short because they say, hey, we won, so everything must be fine.
Yep.
Saban has never defined success by wins and losses because sometimes a win may be a false indicator, and that's kind of what I think you get there. And the reason why so few people achieve what Saban achieves is because so few people even understand the most basic tenets of it.
Yeah, I've been involved in programs too, in the NFL and college, where you look at, you're watching film. Say you're watching film and the twos are in. Right? Some guys are like, hey, the ones can go, let the twos sit here and finish watching film. There's none of that at Alabama. It's like, hey, you need to be sitting here and watching exactly what these other guys are doing so that you can learn from their mistakes too. At all times, you have to be on alert for situations like that. And I think Kirby has done a good job. And there's other coaches around the conference too that have done that. And I mentioned to you before the opening game last year, they were playing Appalachian State, Georgia was. And I was like, you know what? These are the games that signify where you're going. Yeah. It's not the big games. Can you beat Florida? Can you beat Tennessee? It's the game against Appalachian State. Can you win by 40? And can everybody hold up that standard?
Ellis Montezi in the comment section says something interesting. He says, you better be careful of Tennessee. So here's my question, and then we'll change the subject. The process is only an advantage if you're taking advantage of people who sort of don't think that way. But if you've got Saban doing the process at Alabama, Muschamp doing it at South Carolina, Kirby trying it at Georgia, Pruitt trying it at Tennessee, Jimbo Fisher, a former Saban assistant, trying it at Texas A&M. At some point in time, is the value of the process diminished if everybody's trying to do the process?
Well, no, not at all, because there's only so many people that can actually use the process.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, we can talk about Jimbo Fisher, and obviously he used it at Florida State for his national title, but did you see the process last year at Florida State? Did you see the process with Will Muschamp at Florida? Did you see the process with Jim McElwain at Florida? Kirby Smart has done it, so it's like, oh, okay, Saban assistants, but there really has only been one Nick Saban, and now there's Kirby Smart, and they've both used it to the best of their ability.
All right, this is an interesting subject. Let me change the subject here for item number 6 on our SEC Country Live First and 10. So one of the recruits we've been following a lot lately, because let's be honest, there are just not a lot of elite recruits left. A lot of the guys have signed in December. The ones that are still here and available in February, they're getting some outsized media coverage right now because people are legitimately curious where they're going to go. One of those guys is 4-star wide receiver from Jakob Copeland. He's from Mike's hometown of Pensacola, Florida. He's considering right now between Tennessee, Alabama, Florida. Those would seem to be the final 3 spots for Copeland here. And Copeland's been pretty active on social media. Let's see if we can figure out what this means. Let me start with the kind of tweet here. Copeland talking about some Florida coaches coming to visit him in his home. Thanks for the in-home visit tonight. Really appreciate it. Gives the Gator emoji, the hashtag #GoGators. So that's a little positive Florida chatter on Twitter from the wide receiver Jakob Copeland. Then he starts to get a little cryptic, starts to play some games here, have some fun. Stay in the state or leave the state for ball? Another emoji on the screen. Copeland also had some fun here with another one. Florida and Alabama play this weekend in basketball. Now, ain't that about it? And then he gives you the emoji with those, y'all know what that means. Just sort of I don't even know, like shock face or whatever else, confused or whatever. So Copeland having a little fun here with both Florida fans and Alabama fans on Twitter. Now, I'm a big believer that for the most part, Twitter can be misleading in terms of what recruits put on social media. Do you read anything into here about Copeland between Alabama and Florida?
Well, I don't read anything into a decision. I read into the fact that I think he has a really tough choice. Yeah. And I think that, he was obviously committed to Florida at some point. He loves the university down there, loves, what he's going to get out of the Florida fan base, loves that he's from Pensacola, Florida, and can be a part of that, and obviously really likes what Dan Mullen's trying to do. I think he also has had an extremely good time at Alabama. I think he's a guy that wants to win a championship while he's in school, and so he looks at that aspect and says, man, really tough choice. And I'm with you. I don't always read a ton into what you're seeing on Twitter. And I mentioned you before the show. He writes on Twitter yesterday, hey, does anybody know where I can find an orange jacket? It's like, what do you need an orange jacket for? Is this for signing day next week and for all these things? But I think that Jakob Copeland, for the most part, more so than anything, is just a guy who really likes the recruiting process. He likes, the fact that he can go on these officials. He likes that he can talk to people on Twitter and hear back and forth from their fan base. So I think he has a really tough choice. I have no idea which one he's going to lean to. But I don't know that we're going to read between the lines on Twitter and figure it out.
Here's my question, though, because if I'm going to read between the lines on Copeland, what I'm seeing here is this is, to me, and listen, I could be very wrong about this. I'm telling you going in that I'm speculating. This, to me, feels like an attempt to troll one side or the other. Would an in-state Florida kid really troll the Gators on his way outside the state? I mean, even if you want to go play somewhere else, are you going to spike the football on your way out of the state? I sort of take these tweets as good news for Florida here.
Yeah.
I mean, are you going to troll Florida on your way out the door? It's one thing not to go to Florida. I mean, he decommitted, a few weeks ago. It's another thing then to make Florida feel like they're back in it, only to choose Alabama, which a million people have done before. Is that really Copeland's MO here? Because that seems like you're going a long way to really kind of be nasty to Florida. But what's Florida done to you to warrant that?
I don't think, and listen, you might be right, he might go to Florida, but I think you have to be careful in reading too much into it. I mean, listen, when I was in school and I was going into, probably my junior years when Trent Richardson was getting recruited, and he went to Escambia High School the same way. He was, I think he might have been committed to Florida at one point. That was his other school out there. Emmett Smith went to Escambia, which is where both Trent and Jakob Copeland go. So everybody's like, I hear Emmett's been talking to Trent, and he's going to wind up at Florida and all this stuff. The Escambia connection, and then he ends up at Alabama. And I think you have to be careful. I mean, Alabama and Tuscaloosa are a lot closer than Gainesville are. You have to look at it from different dynamics.
So here's Greg Steele says, just say it like it is. He likes attention. Some recruits do like attention, and I don't necessarily fault them for feeling that way. I might try to cultivate some of that attention myself if I was in that position. But I want to make sure you hear what I'm saying here. I'm not saying it'd be weird if Copeland left the state to go to Alabama. I'm saying it'd be weird if he rubbed the salt in Florida on his way outside the state. Because, listen, doing Dog Nation daily every day, I've got a lot of recent history with recruits leaving places to come to Georgia. Channing Tindall, Columbia, South Carolina, hometown, chooses Georgia over South Carolina, among others. He wanted to make sure he did that in a low-key way. Cade Mays, the five-star offensive lineman from Knoxville, chose Georgia over Tennessee, wanted to make sure he did that in kind of a low-key way.
Right.
I'm not saying that I'm going to criticize Copeland if this is the way that he's behaving. I truthfully don't care. But most in-state guys, if they're going to choose the out-of-state school, don't want to necessarily. We saw a receiver last year pick Ole Miss over Mississippi State. A kid from Starkville did that. Most people who do that don't kind of spike their football on the way out because it's just kind of a hard thing to live with later on.
I would agree with you if I thought that Jakob Copeland knew for sure where he was going to go right now or when he's writing these tweets. I just think that Jakob Copeland's a guy who, it's probably going to be the 11th hour. You might get to Monday or Tuesday next week and he says, man, I've actually got to pick a school now. I've been talking to both sides and all of a sudden it comes down to Wednesday and I have to pick a school on signing day. I think that if he already knew where he was going to go and he was trolling Florida, yes, that's salt in the wound, but I still don't think he actually knows where he's going to wind up.
Stephen Phillips says he's coming to Tennessee. And listen, I wouldn't put it past Jeremy Pruitt at this point in time. He got Copeland there for the visit. I said this before. After Tennessee got J.J. Peterson, I wouldn't count him out against anybody. Not with Quay Walker, not with Jakob Copeland, not with anybody. If I'm making a prediction, though, I'm still going Florida or Alabama over Tennessee.
I'm looking at Florida and Alabama at like 40% each, and maybe Tennessee sits there at 20.
Zach Morris, real quick, to just change the subject, still on recruiting, but a different player, different school. Did you see where the Auburn running back signing Asa Martin was named Mr. Football in the state of Alabama? That's a guy that I think that Auburn's going to probably try to use in 2018,
Yes.
I would guess.
I have no doubt about the fact that, and he, he's obviously an incredible player. And, that has been a run under Gus Malzahn, and Auburn fans will attest to this, that he's gotten a ton of Mr. Footballs. And I think Auburn actually has gotten more. Now I think that broke the tie, and Auburn's actually gotten more commitments from Mr. Footballs than Alabama has.
Teresa Stewart, maybe a Tennessee fan here, I'm not sure, says don't count us out when it comes to Jakob Copeland. At least I think that's what Teresa was talking about there. If not, you can correct me on that. Let me change the subject here, move on to item number 7 on our SEC Country Live 1st and 10 list. And I vehemently disagree with this. You tell me if you do as well. Right now, Arkansas is ranked as the lowest recruiting class in the SEC. I mean, they're barely cracking the top 70, I think, in the 24/7 Sports Composite team ranking. It's really kind of a mess what Chad Morris has inherited from a recruiting standpoint. He's had very little time to correct that. But Eric Boland, who covers Arkansas for SECCountry.com, says maybe that low ranking, not that big of a deal. Here's what Boland wrote. The fact that Arkansas is last in the SEC when it comes to those rankings, completely moot. People freak out over that kind of stuff. Half the people who read this are freaked out over the headline alone. By saying it's moot, he says it doesn't matter much at all. That's not a big deal for Morris because he just inherited the job. We got a lot of great folks who cheer for Arkansas that watch this show, and I'm glad to have you. Folks, this ain't moot. This is the kind of thing that could eventually do Chad Morris in as a coach. I'm talking about on the field. You can't skip a year in recruiting and then be okay 2 or 3 years from now. This could be the thing that causes Morris to never get off the ground there in Fayetteville.
No, I agree. And he picks up a commitment last year from a guy out of Birmingham and Miles Mason. I feel like that you're right, he's had his work cut out for him. But when you look at this class, this is not just a subpar class for an SEC team. This is a subpar class for anybody. I mean, this is I think they've got, I'm trying to look at it right now, they might have one player inside the top 300. They don't even have any players inside the top 300 right now.
And this is an SMU class. This is not an Auburn class.
It's just, and while I love Chad Morris at Arkansas, and I really think Arkansas has a chance to really use him to the best of their ability, he's going to have to pull out all the Chad Morris offensive tricks if he's going to want to make them good in football this next couple of years. I
thought for me it was really telling when he didn't get Jerry Bohannon, the best player from the state of Arkansas, the quarterback. I thought that was the kind of recruiting battle that an offensive-minded quarterback coach style head coach, I thought he was supposed to win. And listen, for the folks who are watching this show right now who are not Arkansas fans, it's important to remember. There's the line in the movie Rounders about if you can't spot the sucker in the first 30 minutes, you are the sucker. Let me tell you something. You don't need to worry about trying to spot who the worst team in the SEC is next season. It's Arkansas. They're worse than Vanderbilt. Arkansas is the worst team in the SEC.
Yeah, and it's going to be an uphill climb, too. And you correct me if I'm wrong, too, but when I look at what he's been trying to do, as far as recruiting or building, whatever his presence is around Fayetteville, I feel like of all the new coaches in the SEC, I haven't heard from him. I mean, you don't hear from Chad Morris. You don't see him making a splash. And maybe that's because he hasn't had the commitments, but he just hasn't had that persona, that outward persona that you look at and say, man, I can't wait to go play for him.
John Poe says Arkansas is not a good place right now. I think that's true, and I hate to be that way, but I don't know right now what you have going on in Arkansas to feel good about. You're right, Morris is this smart guy. He was a great offensive coordinator at Clemson, but man, you've got different coaches for different reasons creating a lot of attention right now. Jimbo Fisher just got a 5-star 2019 safety at Texas A&M the other day. Jeremy Pruitt got J.J. Peterson, got a lot of visits from a lot of other guys. Tyson Campbell, who was not going to take any more visits, he got Campbell to take a visit. He's not going to sign him, but he still got him to take a visit. Dan Mullen gets Emory Jones. All these coaches doing all these things. There's no reason why Arkansas should take a backseat to them, but Arkansas right now is the least relevant team in the entire SEC.
No, I completely agree with you. And it's a head scratch for me, too, where they've been recruiting some of these guys. I mean, you look and, they should be able to dip into Texas more. I mean, they've got guys that, are the number 240 ranked player in Texas when you talk about some of the players they've been recruiting. And it just seems like at a place like Arkansas, with all the financial backing they have and the history they have and everything going in the right direction with hiring a coach, they should be able to build up some head of steam. But things have been going in the opposite. That's why I keep talking about Jeremy Pruitt and Dan Mullen and saying, listen, maybe this isn't the right guy at the right time or the right situation, but they are trending in the right direction. Arkansas is not right.
I don't see any evidence of that myself. Item number 8 here on SEC Country Life, our first and 10. We talked earlier about, hey, what if Dan Mullen leaves Mississippi State and then Mississippi State wins more games without him with Mullen at Florida? What would that be like? Another one of these comparisons coming from this same Paul Meyerberg piece between Kevin Sumlin, ousted at Texas A&M, who goes to Arizona, but on Meyerberg's list of coaches in the best position for year one success, He's got Kevin Sumlin at number 3 now with the Wildcats. And way down at number 7 on his list, he's got Jimbo Fisher from Texas A&M. Let me show you what Meyerberg said about Sumlin and then Fisher. Meyerberg writes, "There's no way Sumlin could have turned down the opportunity at Arizona, which isn't just smack in the middle of solid recruiting ground, an area Sumlin maximized during his tenure at Texas A&M, but also features a very solid, if young, roster. Notably with quarterback Khalil Tate, should Sumlin's schemes take hold, Arizona's got the talent to challenge for a national ranking." As far as Jimbo Fisher at Texas A&M, what Meyerberg said about that situation, tough schedule. Get Clemson, Alabama in September. It's a good thing A&M's thinking long-term with Fisher, who needs 3 years to crack the top 10 at Florida State, and will need just as long, if not more, to repeat that feat in College Station. 7 wins in 2018 is going to yield 8 or more in 2019, double-digit wins in 2020, so on down the line. But even if there's the total buy-in from the start, it's hard to see how the Aggies navigate through a rowdy schedule this fall. So good news for A&M fans, and that Meyerberg says eventually A&M may be good, but in year 1, it sounds like he's got someone winning more games at Arizona than Jimbo's going to win in College Station. Would that be a problem if that occurred?
No, I don't think it would. And I think when you're a Texas A&M fan, when you're an Aggie fan right now, I don't think that head coaching is the problem you're worried about. Does that make sense? And it's hard for me to spit that out right now, but I think that you worry about recruiting and you worry about on-field play, but to me, you have a coach that's won a national title and knows what it takes to get there and knows the process we talked about a minute ago. I don't think that's at the top of your list when you look at Kevin Sumlin. You know what you had in Kevin Sumlin. Kevin Sumlin probably got a year longer than he should have. You knew what you were going to get at him. You were going to get 8 wins. But it's just like the conversation we had about Rick yesterday compared to Kirby Smart. At some point, the fan base just says, you know what, we deserve more than this. We deserve a 10-win season. We deserve to not get blown out in some of these games every year. And I think Kevin Sumlin's walking into a great situation in Arizona where he really fits the Pac-12. And you mentioned Khalil Tate. He's going to be a guy that's going to be electric on the field. Jimbo Fisher just doesn't have anybody like that. Nick Starkel, for as good as I think he can be under Jimbo Fisher, he's not Khalil Tate. He's not a game-breaking guy in and of himself. He can't take over a game. And so I think that Kevin Sumlin's way better set up to succeed in year 1.
Is this my bias talking, though, when I say that every year we sort of pick some quarterback, some team out west, hey, this team is going to be something to watch. They're just as likely to win 6 games that to win 10. You know what I'm saying? I mean,
that's for sure your bias talking. I think it is. I don't know how much of Khalil Tate you watched this year, but
not much.
It's like,
I'm not sure I get the Pac-12.
When you have a basketball team and you have one guy that's a good player, like a high school basketball team, he can take over a game. That's what Khalil Tate was in the Pac-12 last year. It was like, you know what? We don't have anybody else in some of these positions. They had a couple of good players, but Khalil Tate can take over a game. I mean, he's rushing for like 250 yards. He's throwing for 150 yards. He can take over a game. And in Kevin Sumlin's system, where you saw a guy like Johnny Manziel flourish, he's going to be just fine.
I'm going to say the same thing about Texas A&M that I said about Florida earlier in the show. First of all, I think that Jimbo Fisher over the long haul is going to be very good for Texas A&M. He needs to win more games this year than Kevin Sumlin does. He does. He needs to win more.
It's going to be tough. I mean, it's going to be tough. And you mentioned it right there. He's going to get Clemson and Alabama in two of the first 3 games he played.
I'm not asking you to beat those teams. I'm asking you to win more games than Arizona. I don't think that's asking very much.
It'll be tough, man. It's going to be tough.
I'm calling it right now. Arizona goes 7-5.
I look at Texas A&M's schedule.
Arizona goes 7-5.
You don't even know what they're playing.
But I'm telling you, they're going 7-5.
I don't think. That's probably not a reach.
I haven't seen their schedule, but they're going 7-5.
I'm looking at Texas A&M's schedule right now, and to me, it just doesn't say that. 7-5. I think is going to be a good year. You got Clemson, you got at Alabama, you're at Mississippi State, you're at Auburn. You're going to play LSU. It's going to be tough.
Texas A&M's got a hard schedule.
I know. That's why
it's the wrong year to be playing Clemson.
That's why I just don't think 7-5 to me. I mean, it's like, if we're 7-5, Kevin Sumlin might do better than that, but I don't think any A&M fan is going to be down.
Poor Jimbo. It's like I leave the ACC, I can't get away from Clemson.
Right back.
It's like, my gosh, I did all this to get away from Clemson.
Yeah.
Item number 9 here, SEC Country Live, our 1st and 10. Maybe some good news for Alabama with a position that desperately needs and a highly rated guy at that position. I'm talking about 5-star cornerbacks here with Isaac Taylor Stewart from out there in San Diego. He takes his visit to Alabama and he tweets out that things were feeling pretty good for him on the visit. Here's what he tweets out. Thank you to the Alabama, the elephant emoji there. Definitely got that feeling back like in 15. Tick-tock. What did Isaac Taylor Stewart mean about this? Well, Chris Kirsch from SEC Country caught up with Taylor Stewart to ask him what that tweet meant. Here's what Isaac Taylor Stewart said about that. I mean, the feeling of just how great a school Alabama is. They just came off a national title. They're #1 school. Seeing the weight room, the facilities, the coaches. having that feeling that I had before in 2015, meaning when he visited the program earlier. You obviously pay very close attention to Alabama. They certainly need Isaac Taylor Stewart. Are those quotes, tweets, everything else? Is that evidence that they may be in good shape here? USC would seem to be the prime challenger.
Yeah, USC is definitely the prime challenger. And I'm going to say something. I don't know if I've ever said this about a recruit. It's going to hurt my feelings if he doesn't go to Alabama.
Really?
I mean, it's going to hurt my feelings. I'm not going to say. I will say my heart's set on him going to Alabama because I just
you like him better than Surtain, or you just think he's a better chance than Surtain?
I think there's a better chance he goes than Surtain. And obviously I like Surtain as a player, but I like Isaac Taylor Stewart to me is a guy that you look at and you say this guy could be a starter at one of your cornerback spots next year for Nick Saban's defense. Yeah. It's just the truth. I mean, you have some guys that are underclassmen in Alabama that are coming up that will be good players, but when you look at the depth, this is a guy who could play immediately in a team that really has sent a ton of cornerbacks and guys in the secondary to the NFL. And so I think when you look at his comments there and you look at his comments about what he said to Chris Kirshner and you look at, really that USC could be building a good class, could not. I have a strong feeling that he winds up at Alabama. Now, the crystal ball probably doesn't say that right now. He probably is skewed towards USC, but from his comments and just knowing what I've seen of him as a player, I'm kind of hoping and I'm expecting him to wind up at Alabama.
Jerry Lewis, who's got a Georgia G in his Facebook profile, says Tyson Campbell's better. You might expect that from a guy with a Georgia G. And, when you think about those other cornerbacks, I mean, obviously there is some thought that Campbell may be leaning in Georgia's direction. That's the one that Georgia fans are going to be heartbroken about if Campbell doesn't go to Georgia. You seem to feel the same way about Isaac Taylor Stewart. I mean, if you're an LSU fan.
And Surtain,
if you're an LSU fan, does it make you feel better about Surtain to LSU that Alabama made such a strong impression on Isaac Taylor Stewart? I mean, I wouldn't put it past Alabama to get two of them, but the odds are that does Alabama get this one and Surtain goes to LSU, Campbell goes to Georgia?
I'm kind of reading between the lines, and I probably shouldn't. You shouldn't do that in recruiting. But I just feel like the Surtain thing has cooled off for Alabama, in my opinion. Now, he could, he could still wind up at Alabama, but I really, when Alabama dove in on Elijah Griffin, when they really dove in, with both feet on Elijah Griffin, and they were like, man, this is going to work out. We're going to really go hard at him. He's been being visited by a lot of the Alabama people. Obviously he's been out. That to me was like, I don't know what we're going to get at Surtain.
Well, our buddy Cliff Nelson's betting Crown Royal and stuff like that.
Yeah, a gallon of Crown Royal, guarantee it.
He's just betting those gallons left and right. He thinks Surtain's coming to LSU, so maybe it works out that way where LSU, Georgia, and Alabama all three get the five-star cornerback. And I don't know about LSU's situation as much. They're probably a little bit deeper there. But for Georgia and Alabama, if they get the five-star cornerback, they're both going to use them next year.
Oh, there's no doubt. There's no doubt. And you look at 6 secondary members from Alabama's national title team are gone. I mean, you had Ronnie Harrison leave, you had Minka Fitzpatrick leave, there was 4 other seniors. They've got to find guys that can play in the secondary. That's why I look at Isaac Taylor Stewart and I say, listen, it's going to really hurt, in my opinion, if you don't land a guy like this during this recruiting class.
All right, let's do item number 10 here, and things are getting kind of nasty here. What's that line from the movie Anchorman that escalated quickly?
Yeah.
We've got some quick escalation here in this Missouri-South Carolina deal. Let's go back in time here. When this initially happened, I think we, for the most part, just sort of took this as sort of a lighthearted deal here. If you may remember, over the weekend, the Tigers and the Gamecocks got in a bit of a scuffle. These are two highly ranked women's basketball teams. Our thought on this show is, hey, listen, when you got competitive athletes, when you got a good game, you're going to have some scuffling like that. Women no different than men in that regard. Neither one of us thought it was that big of a deal. I mean, I hate to say this. I thought it was kind of funny. I mean, it was decent video. It was worth playing. But there is some reason to believe this is a lot more serious than that. You've got some accusations here coming out of Missouri that as the Missouri team was leaving the court, they had some not accusations, but some slurs hurled at them. They were spat upon. There's even a pretty volatile quote here from Missouri Athletic Director Jim Sturck that Don Staley, the South Carolina coach, somehow, quote, promoted the environment that led to all of this. That's a huge, accusation in Don Staley's direction. A great former player and a terrific coach there at South Carolina. South Carolina sort of pushing back on this. Ray Tanner, the former baseball coach, who's athletic director there, basically insinuating they've got no proof that the allegations on the Missouri side that even happened, that the slurs and the sort of threats from fans. This thing has gotten ugly fast.
Yeah, it almost reminds you a little bit in a very strange sort of way about the Jim McElwain ordeal, where they're like going back and forth, hey, I got a death threat. And it's like, hey, we don't have any really proof that you got a death threat.
Yeah.
And I do find it hard to believe, and obviously I don't know if it happened or if it didn't. If it did happen, it's a terrible thing. But you do find it hard to believe, if you are a South Carolina fan, that There's no video of this. I mean, like everything these days is video.
Right,
there's evidence.
We had
of
two
everything.
different videos of this fight.
Yeah, there's evidence of everything, and
Listen,
you're telling me there's no first-person account.
Here's
of
the
this.
perfect example of this. The other day we showed on SEC Country Live the Philadelphia Eagles fan running into the pole. 3 days later, we had a second video of the same thing.
In an interview with the guy.
Yeah, in an interview, there's video of everything. Here is the quote from Ray Tanner. I'm going to try to read it. He says it's a great environment for women's basketball. I think it's obvious that we would disagree with some of the comments that were made about our environment. Maybe some comments that were directed at Coach Staley are beyond the understanding for me. It goes without saying that what she's done outside of basketball speaks for itself. So he defends her, sort of criticized Missouri, and it is kind of dirty pool here if Missouri is sort of exaggerating the scene just because they didn't like the environment the game was created. I mean, the name of the game in the SEC, I don't care what sport you're talking about, is to create the most intense environment you can. Now, no one wants slurs, no one wants, any kind of contact with fans physically with the players involved, but making it a tough place to play, that's what South Carolina's supposed to do.
Yeah, I agree. And the thing we didn't know, or I didn't know when we were watching this video the other day, is these are the two top teams in the SEC. This is not like some bottom dwellers or teams that don't have a chance at really making a splash. These are two teams that are going to make a ton of splash when it comes down to tournament time. And so I think that that's kind of, in my opinion, an added kind of angle on all this. Is these are not only just two basketball teams that are feuding, these are two very good basketball teams that are feuding, and all of a sudden making those accusations about Don Staley, to me, is where you really have to start asking questions.
Could not know less about the story. I'm siding with South Carolina.
Yeah. I kind of feel the same way. It's like until I see evidence.
Could not know less about this. I'm on Don Staley.
It's almost like, really the only name that sticks out to me is Don Staley.
Yeah, exactly.
So it's like I fall back.
Yeah, she's got way more credibility in this discussion than some Missouri AD I've never heard of.
Yeah, I agree.
I'm going to be with Don Staley on this one. All right. Champion of Lifetime, and close at the show the same way every day. And imagine my surprise. I like to think we run a pretty tight ship around here. You see Mike and I, chatting in front of the cameras, but the truth is we're not doing the hard work. The hard work's done by the people who get the show on the air every day. And we develop, I think, kind of a close bond with these folks. So I was just disappointed today to find out there was an Alabama tight end that got arrested for misdemeanor marijuana or something like that. What's his name?
Major Tennyson.
Major Tennyson.
Freshman tight end.
Unbelievably cool name. You hate that he was involved in some potential illegal activity. Major Tennyson's a great name. But when I saw Tennyson's mugshot, he looks just like one of the guys that works with us on the show, a guy named Michael, who's one of our producers. Let me show you the side-by-side here. When I saw Tennyson get the mugshot, he looks just like our guy here. I was devastated.
I feel like Major Tennyson's behind the glass right now. If y'all watch the Mississippi State podcast, too, this is Terp. This is
Terp from the Mississippi State podcast. And Michael's at least 15 years younger than me, so I sort of think of him as not really like a son, but a much younger cousin, maybe. So I want the best for Michael in his life, and it's sort of like that horrific image of, oh my gosh, this is what our buddy Terp would look like if he got arrested for misdemeanor marijuana possession.
Yeah, Tim Grindstaff says doppelganger. I mean, that is perfect.
They do look just
alike. It is a doppelganger,
right?
man. When I saw that earlier, I was like, man, I've seen this guy before. I don't know how much, but the mugshot really brings it home. And I got to give a shout out to Michael, our guy Terp, for actually taking his own mugshot on him.
Yeah, let me see the picture one more time. First of all, for those of you, our guys on the right, that's was it Major Tennyson?
Major Tennyson.
That's him on the left. First of all, how jealous are you of Michael's hair? That's like a quarry.
It looks like
if I could just carve out a portion of that hair.
Listen, he's got great hair, but he has his bed head in this photo. I mean, this guy looks like he's been laying on the right side of his head right now. He's got to get that. He's got to get that tidied up.
I think that's what the kids do
these
days.
Might be.
Listen, So, yeah, there's that. Thanks for being with us here on SEC Country Live today. Check out our podcast. If you missed a portion of our show, you don't get to see Michael's face if you listen to the podcast, but you can certainly check it out there. It's a great way to kind of get caught up with everything we're doing here on SEC Country Live. Also, it'd be a huge help to us if you share the show with your friends on Facebook to let them know we're talking about the SEC each and every day here on SEC Country Live. Podcast and iTunes. We're here on Facebook Live. For those of you that watch on YouTube, thanks so much as well. We'll see you tomorrow again at 3 p.m. Eastern Time for another episode of SEC Country Live.